Okay, so we're going to cover something real quick and basic and easy, some lights. Kind of like previous video where we talk about the basics of light. I also live in a storm apparently. Lightning. So here I have an itty bitty scene with just a couple cubes, and there is a light. That is the light. This is a real-time light, so there's real-time shadows and lighting. That's cool. And here's like a mimic player, and if I move the player in, you can see they get affected by lighting and they cast shadows. Life is good. The downside is performance batches are very, very high. So I wanted to just briefly talk about lighting in the ways of if I were to bake it. And if I mark these as static, so I'm more or less telling Unity I don't plan on moving these so we can do special things to them. And I say bake. And lighting I don't have auto generate on. I think I got most of the light settings set to default other than I put it onto the GPU. So we hit generate. Now it takes a while, but you'll see the batches were at 35 and there's only okay, so we are back. Now you can see it does look a lot lighter with the ambience, but you'll notice like the batches have dropped right down. So that's the whole idea of baking, is it's performance wise it's a lot better. The downside is my capsule here does no longer receive light, cast shadows, or anything. So that is kind of a major issue. So you got to be careful with what you need to bake and how you bake it. So there are ways around that though. Now with the lighting, I swapped it over to CPU. I had some issues. I can try swapping that back. There are things that you can do though. For example, I could create a light probe group. So if you have this guy cranked down, you won't be able to see things. So keep in mind you got to have a little bit there. I can probably use a little more because I can't even select anything because they're way too small. So I can now over here edit probes and add probes and so forth. But you can drag these things around, and this is one of those things where there's a bunch of third-party assets that can actually help with light probes, and they are actually really worth it just for this cause. Is if you have like you got to put these things in kind of like all the different spots, I guess you could say it, where you take an average and it casts light for you, and you can build a ton of these things. But I'm going to try to follow the shadows. And they should link themselves automatically. If I come back over here, say duplicate that guy and this one. I won't do the whole room. I'll just get enough so that you guys can get the idea of what this actually does. Because you could be here for a long time doing this type of stuff. which is why this is like those third-party assets will actually find all these spots and place all these things for you in just the right areas, and it makes your life a lot easier. Here. I'll just throw a couple over here, nothing crazy. Now, if you don't lay these things out, the light bouncing back won't be very good. So I'm just going to cover this corner, to which I can probably use at least just a couple more. Just kind of along these seams. Right, so you end up getting this really crazy spider web of stuff, like just trippy looking. And if I now go to my lighting and I rebake it, but you can see like a very large difference just right off the bat. My little capsule guy here actually has light on him, and yet this light isn't doing anything anymore. Like technically, like I can turn this light off. It doesn't do anything. I can move. I'm going to leave him there because he's a baked light. If I move him and try to rebake it, it wants to rebake everything in weird places. But you see how my capsule, which is a dynamic object, has lighting, and as I move, he'll actually come in and out of shadows. So now, obviously it looks really weird here, but that's because I didn't put any probes really over here to capture that data for him to feed off of. But he feeds off like the nearest probes, and that's what's showing up here. And this is how you can have lighting and still have shadows, but it's baked lighting, so the performance is actually really good. Now, playing around with baked lighting is nothing but a pain in the ass, but hey, nothing's perfect. So the other thing is now, okay, I'm going to actually take this light and I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to show you another light, and I'll show you what it looks like when we clear the light maps. So if I clear baked data, everything's going to go black. And the area light is kind of a cool one. I'm going to turn lighting off so I can see. Create light, area light. So an area light, except if I turn light on, like it doesn't technically do anything, I guess. Like it's not emitting light, but I can tell it to be like, oh, you're, 15 meters, give it a range of 20, and you get this kind of floating square, and it's shooting towards its Z. Keep that in mind. And if I want, I can actually grab these little points and stretch it out. And they have to be baked. They have no other option in this world. They were not given that. That's why it says baked only. But now, if I bake, we should have as it's baking, you get some crazy things happening here. Now you're obviously going to have those shadows coming from different directions, like we had with the light probe itself, or the point light, but and the probes still work in this situation, but the whole area is kind of nice and evenly lit, and without really much of anything, and that's just this area light. You make a big square, you have a range, and you shoot down, right? Like if I made the range 2, it should only come down 2 units, so roughly, I don't know, along here. It'll just be black everywhere else. It'll look kind of funny, but it'll be for demonstrational purposes only, obviously. So the whole baking process can be just such a pain. I said lots of times I end up rebooting Unity. If you ever find you have issues with, doesn't matter how you bake it, it looks like crap. If you actually go into your model FBXs, sometimes you'll see them, this generate light map UVs isn't on, so it just flat out won't work. So you have to turn that on. So mine says it's on, but I have some really, really bad lighting happening here. Well, anyways, I mean, I'm sure you guys kind of get this. So, like I said, I'll do one light at a time into different areas, and it is a pain. But if you want, like things like your players or creatures or whatever it is that you want to have interact with baked lighting, because a baked lighting, if you look at this cube, it has a new, almost like a new texture, right? It's not just a solid color anymore, because the texture is part of the cube now. Like the shadows and the lighting are part of the cubes, which is why the things can't change runtime. But it's also good on performance. Like it's kind of like you're like literally painting the light in there, right? Okay, there is one more thing actually. I thought I would add. I actually edited the video before, and I thought, okay, I better cover this. I don't want to go deep into mixed lighting, because mixed lighting gets into a very complex, crazy situation. But so if we look at lighting now and what I have, right? So we've seen what baked lights do, right? And we can see that light probe groups can gather lighting data and pass it on to dynamic objects. And light probes and the baked lighting, it is really good for performance. But even with that, it's just about done. Even with receiving lighting, it's not like we cast shadows, and you guys probably noticed that in the video, right? So that'll be done in a second here, and I'll show you. Now, is there a way to bake and have shadows? Well, yes and no. So we can see, like, yes, okay, we have lighting, and I can take some data from the light probes from the baked stuff, but I have no shadows. Now if I go to lighting, let's move our player over so it's more of a surprise. Whoa. And I say you have different ones, so more or less subtractive is the crappiest, bake indirect is alright, shadow mask is the best. But then you have other things also involved, such as when you go to quality, shadow mask mode, distance to shadow mask. Now if I put just shadow mask, okay, and I go to my point light and I say you are mixed, right? So we're at 10 batches. Now it's going to rebake, obviously, again. Such a pain in the ass. Always take his time. But we'll get a pretty good result doing it this way. With the mixed lighting, said, now I don't want to go too far in that rabbit hole because Lord, Thunder, it get crazy. There's a lot of options with lighting. It's not a fun thing to delve into unless that's your thing. Like I said, now I'm in shadow mode, and I went to my qualities and I went to shadow mask, just normal shadow mask, not shadow mask distance. Right, so I'm on shadow mask. It is done baking. This is mixed lighting. We're at 15 batches. We're not as good as baked lighting, but it's not that bad. Right, so I'm still using the probes to have lighting on stuff, but I have shadows. Looks almost as good as real-time lighting, just about. And you can see if I delete the probes, I mean, I've got shadows. My capsule's black. I mean, if you look forward, I mean, it looks like he has lighting. I guess maybe he does, but it's crappy. Right? It's kind of better with those probes in there as well, even if you only have a few probes to help boost that data. But anyways, the point is we have shadows, and we have, you know, well, even if I stand there, we're only at, like I said, like 18 batches. It's a lot different than if I go to this light and tell it it's real time. Right? Because now we're real time. That's it. Period. Real time. In fact, I can even go to the lighting and say, don't auto generate. Just clear your baked data. Get rid of it. And the capsule will look a little better with the real lighting now. The scene, not really so much. It's going to be pretty close, actually. Oh, okay. Well, apparently it's darker. But that's, again, with the ambience and stuff. But other than being darker, and, you know, the capsule's receiving proper lighting itself, it's double the batches. So it's much higher on that kind of stuff. So you can play with all this kind of stuff. This is some of those ambience I was talking about, but not really like, oh, right. You can go baked on those real time. I'm not gonna get into all that crazy stuff, but anyways, the point is, how does that look there compared to when we had it with, actually I wonder if I can, compared to when I have probes and the shadow mask using mixed. Right? Like in reality, like, yeah, you know, like if you have good probe placement and the shadow mask happening, I mean, it looks pretty good. Looks pretty damn good. And being half of the performance cost of real-time lights, which is pretty major. Pretty freaking major, especially if you have a lot of lights. That is huge. Said the only pain in the ass is the light probes. Those damn light probes. They suck. I hate placing those things out. Thousands of them just scattering out everywhere. So, but like I said, there are third-party assets, Magic Probe and stuff like that, that just, you turn it on, goes, and it just paints your scene with lighting or light probes in all the right spots, and it works really, really well, right? So if you're going to use bake lighting at all, you're probably going to be using light probes. And if you're using light probes, I would totally recommend getting a third-party asset.